The rain had begun as a whisper against the windows of the small trooper outpost, but by the time Daniel Hayes fastened his duty belt, the night was alive with the relentless roar of a storm. October in rural Kentucky had a way of swallowing light whole, turning the highways into black rivers that stretched into nowhere. Daniel moved with the calm precision of a man who had done this 1,000 times. He slid his service pistol into its holster, adjusted the brim of his hat, and glanced at the clock above the desk. 11:47 p.m. His shift would be over in just over an hour. The radio crackled. Unit 14 status? Daniel lifted the receiver, his voice even, almost flat. 14. Beginning routine patrol. Highway 19 northbound. No hesitation. No fatigue. No sign of the storm in his tone. The dispatcher logged his call, unaware it would be his last. He stepped into the night and the cold bit his face like broken glass. Rain slicked the parking lot, reflecting the glow of the floodlight in trembling pools. His cruiser, freshly washed earlier that day, now looked like a beast caught in the downpour. Daniel slid behind the wheel, shut the heavy door, and the storm's roar dulled to a muted drumming. For a moment, he simply sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the horizon where the highway disappeared into blackness. His pulse was steady, but his thoughts carried a weight he did not voice. The patrol car rumbled to life, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. Tires hissed against wet pavement as Daniel merged onto the highway. The world beyond was empty. No taillights, no headlights, just the unending rhythm of wipers fighting the storm. Minutes bled together. His breathing matched the metronome of the wipers, slow and deliberate. He passed mile markers 42 and 43. At 44, he reached for the radio again. Unit 14 to dispatch. Road clear. Visibility low. Continuing north. Copy 14, came the response. There was nothing remarkable in his tone, so calm it bordered on detached. Anyone listening closely might have noticed it wasn't the voice of a man observing the road, but of someone rehearsing a part. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the trees on either side of the highway. Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel. For a fraction of a second, his reflection in the rearview mirror looked older than his 35 years. Eyes shadowed, jaw clenched as though bracing for something unseen. The storm pressed harder. Branches littered the road. At mile marker 47, he slowed, scanning the woods beyond the guardrail. Something moved between the trees, maybe a deer, perhaps nothing. He rolled down the window, rain spraying across his sleeve, and listened. Nothing. Just the hiss of the storm. He rolled the window back up. A sigh caught in his chest. At 12:21 a.m., his voice returned to the radio, clipped and final. Unit 14. Approaching mile marker 50. All clear. It was the last time anyone heard from Trooper Daniel Hayes. The next morning, sunlight broke across the drenched fields. Farmers headed out to mend storm damage and commuters filled the roads. But mile marker 50 stood silent. There was no cruiser, no sign of skids or struggle, just wet asphalt steaming in the early light. At the outpost, Daniel's locker stood untouched. His uniform cap still hung on the hook, and a lunch pail with an uneaten sandwich sat waiting. Claire Hayes, his wife, arrived at the station by noon, her hair damp, her face pale. "My husband didn't come home," she told the desk sergeant. Her voice trembled, not from the storm, but from something deeper. Daniel wouldn't just leave. By evening, search parties combed the woods, volunteers trudging through mud and brush. They found nothing. No car, no footprints, no trace of a man who had left the station less than 24 hours before. And as the second night fell, the whispers began. Maybe he ran, maybe he cracked, maybe the storm swallowed him whole. But Claire knew better. She felt it in her bones. Something had followed him into the dark and it hadn't let him go. Claire Hayes had always hated storms. As a child, she would hide beneath quilts waiting for thunder to pass. But the silence that followed this storm was worse than any thunderclap. It was the silence of a house without Daniel's boots on the porch, without the scrape of his key in the lock, without his voice calling her name. She sat at the kitchen table, untouched coffee growing cold, as officers in uniform moved quietly through her living room. They tried to avoid her eyes as if their own unease might spill into hers. A missing trooper was bad enough. A missing trooper with no sign of struggle, no abandoned cruiser, no body. That was unthinkable. Mrs. Hayes, one officer said gently. "We'll do everything we can. Sometimes patrol cars break down in the woods. He could have gone looking for help." Claire shook her head. Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, trembling against the porcelain mug. "Daniel would have called in. You know that." He wouldn't leave his post without a word. They didn't answer. One by one, they filed out, leaving her alone in the hush of her kitchen, the clock ticking loud enough to fill the silence. By dusk, neighbors arrived. Some offered casseroles wrapped in foil, as though grief could be soaked up by food. Others came with stories, half concern, half gossip. They say his car wasn't even on the road. My brother swears he saw Daniel arguing with another trooper last week. Maybe he had debts, gambling, something like that. Claire listened, face pale, lips pressed into a line. She wanted to scream, but the weight of eyes on her shoulders held her still. Rumors spread faster than the storm winds had blown. By the second day, the whispers found their way into the local paper. State trooper missing after night patrol. The article mentioned Daniel's reported stresses at work, how he had been under strain. They quoted a retired officer who said Daniel seemed distracted in recent weeks. Claire crumpled the paper in her fist. Distracted? Strained? He was loyal. He was steady. He had promised her he would grow old in that house with its creaking porch swing and garden he never finished planting. But the town did not see promises. They saw mystery, and in mystery they saw opportunity. On the third day, Claire visited the station herself. She marched past the front desk, ignoring the sympathetic eyes that followed. Captain Reynolds met her in his office, his large frame casting shadows across the blinds. "Claire," he began, but she cut him off. "You're not looking hard enough." Her voice was sharp now, brittle with anger. "He's out there, somewhere. Someone knows what happened." Reynolds exhaled, shoulders sagging. "We've combed 30 miles of road, nothing. No tire marks, no evidence of a crash. Claire, sometimes men—" He stopped himself, choosing his words. "Sometimes men carry burdens we can't see. Maybe he—" "Don't!" Her hand slammed the desk. "Don't you dare tell me my husband walked away from his life. He wouldn't leave me. He wouldn't leave this town." The captain nodded, not in agreement, but in resignation. He knew the file would eventually be marked unsolved. He knew resources would dry up, new cases would take priority, and Daniel Hayes would become another name in a drawer. That night, Claire lay awake in their bed, her hand resting on the empty pillow beside her. She replayed their last conversation. Mundane words about groceries, the light bulb in the hallway, her reminder for him to be careful. Nothing unusual, nothing that said goodbye. But in the quiet, her mind turned over fragments she had ignored. The way Daniel had sat on the porch 2 nights before, staring at the horizon as though measuring its weight. The words he almost spoke but swallowed back. "If I disappear." She could almost hear him say it, though he never had. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She knew the whispers in town would only grow louder. They would paint Daniel as a deserter, a weak man, a liar, and they would paint her as the foolish wife who hadn't seen it coming. But Claire Hayes carried her grief like a blade, sharp and unyielding. She swore to herself in that dark and lonely bedroom that she would not let his name vanish with him. The search parties dwindled. The casseroles stopped coming. Life in the town pressed forward, while Claire's world remained suspended in that storm-racked night. And in the shadows of silence, betrayal began to take root, not yet visible but inevitable. Because somewhere, someone knew why Daniel Hayes never came home. 30 years blurred by like rain against a windshield. The storm that had swallowed Daniel Hayes became less of a tragedy and more of a campfire story. Children whispered it in schoolyards, the trooper who drove into the night and never came back. By the 1990s, Claire Hayes was a widow in everything but paperwork. She never remarried, never moved from the small house with its peeling paint and silent porch swing. People pitied her at first, then avoided her altogether, as though her grief were contagious. The town's memory of Daniel hardened into rumor, then myth. Some said he ran off with a lover. Others believed he'd been on the take, vanishing before his secrets surfaced. The truth was irrelevant. Time had made it pliable, moldable, a story to fit whatever darkness people wanted to believe. But myths have a way of breaking when faced with something tangible. It was a humid August morning in 2011 when a construction crew arrived at the edge of town, clearing land for a strip mall. The site had once been farmland, abandoned for decades, its soil packed and stubborn. Backhoes dug into the earth, carving trenches where foundations would sit. At first, the operator thought he'd hit a stone. The metal claw scraped against something solid, hollow. He backed the machine up, jumped down into the pit, and brushed dirt aside with his hands. What gleamed beneath the soil wasn't rock, it was steel. The crew gathered around as mud peeled back to reveal the curved roof of a vehicle. Rust had eaten its edges, but its shape was unmistakable. A car. Buried deep, deliberately. The foreman squinted, wiping sweat from his brow. That's no junker. Look at the light bar. Red glass, fractured but still clinging to the frame, caught the morning sun. A silence fell over the men. They didn't need a badge to tell them what they had uncovered. Every man there had grown up with the story of the trooper who never came home. Phones were pulled out, calls made. Within the hour, police cars swarmed the site, tape stretched, news vans assembled. Reporters shoved microphones at anyone who would speak, their voices breathless. Could this be the missing patrol car of Trooper Daniel Hayes? The answer came swiftly. Mud-stained metal numbers on the trunk confirmed the unit. 14. The air around the dig thickened with dread. Cameras zoomed in as the vehicle was hoisted from the earth, soil streaming off it like blood from a wound. The cruiser's tires were deflated, the windshield shattered, but the interior was sealed by years of mud and weight. When investigators pried the door open, the crowd leaned forward, desperate for the horror they'd half expected all these years. But the seats were empty. No bones. Nobody. What they did find only deepened the wound. Daniel's badge, dulled with rust, lay on the passenger seat. His service pistol, wiped clean of bullets, rested in its holster. And on the dashboard, placed carefully, was his wedding ring. The crowd recoiled. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a man lost to the weather. It was a burial, a message preserved underground for 3 decades. That evening, as the car was towed away under floodlights, whispers rose again across town. Only now they weren't whispers of abandonment. They were darker, heavier. Words like murder, cover-up, betrayal. At her kitchen table, Claire Hayes, now an old woman with silver hair and trembling hands, watched the footage on television. The sight of the car, Daniel's car, being dragged from the dirt made her chest seize. She pressed her palm to the screen as if she could reach through and touch him. Her voice broke the silence of the empty house. I told them, she whispered. I told them he didn't leave. And somewhere, buried not in soil but in memory, the truth stirred, restless after 30 years of silence. The town had buried Daniel Hayes once, but now his ghost had returned to demand answers. The patrol car sat under a white canopy at the county impound lot, sealed off from the public's hungry eyes. Floodlights cast harsh beams across its rusted frame, making the cruiser look less like a vehicle and more like a coffin dredged up from the soil. Detective Lisa Monroe stood at the edge of the cordon, notebook in hand. Younger officers murmured, nervous laughter masking unease, but Lisa didn't join them. She'd seen cold cases before, but this one carried a weight she could feel in her bones. The town had carried Daniel Hayes' ghost for 30 years, and now it seemed he'd been clawed back into their lives. The forensic team circled like surgeons preparing for an operation. With deliberate care, they photographed every angle, every scrape. Lisa moved closer, her voice low, steady. Let's start inside. The techs pried open the passenger side door with gloved hands. Years of pressure released in a sigh of stale air, thick with earth and mildew. A camera flashed. Inside, the mud-caked interior was startlingly intact. The vinyl seats had rotted, but the shape of items remained sharp, purposeful. Lisa leaned in, her eyes catching the gleam of metal on the dashboard. A wedding ring, dull with corrosion, rested in the shallow tray as if placed there gently, not dropped in panic. She frowned. Bag it, next the badge. It lay on the passenger seat, the numbers etched deep, still legible despite rust. It hadn't slipped or been lost in a struggle, it had been set down. And then the holster. Daniel's service weapon sat inside, empty. No bullets, no spent casings, just silence. Lisa scribbled in her notebook, the pattern clear. Nothing about this scene screamed accident. It whispered intention. Someone had staged this, buried not just a car but a message. One of the techs broke the silence. No bones, no clothing fibers. Nothing to suggest he was inside when it went under. Lisa straightened, scanning the vehicle as rain began to mist against the canopy. This isn't where he died. This is where someone wanted him remembered. Her words cut through the night, and the officers nearby shifted uncomfortably. By dawn, the media frenzy had swollen. News anchors stood outside the police perimeter, their voices sharp with intrigue. The car of Trooper Daniel Hayes, who vanished in 1981, has been recovered, buried deep underground. Clips of the ring, the badge, and the empty holster ran in a loop, feeding the nation's fascination with the mystery unsolved for 3 decades. Inside her small house on the hill, Claire Hayes sat in her recliner, the news glowing across her lined face. She clutched a photograph of Daniel in uniform, his smile tight, reserved, the way he always posed for cameras. Tears blurred her vision as the reporter's voice droned. "Investigators now believe foul play is likely," she whispered to the photograph. "They've finally said the words, Daniel." But whispers couldn't erase the storm of rumors. Online forums lit up. Some claimed the ring was proof Daniel had chosen to disappear, leaving his life behind. Others insisted it was a police cover-up, that he'd been silenced after discovering something damning. In the courthouse diner the next morning, old men leaned over coffee cups, muttering. "They buried that car on Sheriff Harlan's land, didn't they?" One said, "That ain't no coincidence." Heads nodded. In a town where silence had been bought for decades, the past was beginning to stir. Back at the impound lot, Lisa studied the cruiser again, her breath misting in the cold air. The rain had stopped, but the storm it left behind would not. She traced the pattern in her mind. Badge, gun, ring, all deliberate, all placed with care. Whoever had done this wanted Daniel Hayes buried in myth, but not forgotten. Her jaw tightened. You don't bury a car this deep unless you're hiding something bigger. And as she closed her notebook, she knew the next step wasn't in the dirt or the steel. It was in the people who had survived long enough to keep their secrets. And the first person she would have to face was Claire Hayes. The knock on Claire Hayes's door echoed through the quiet house like a summons. She sat in her recliner, blanket pulled to her lap, her thin fingers worrying the edge of the fabric. When she opened the door, Detective Lisa Monroe stood there, rain still on her coat, eyes steady but not unkind. "Mrs. Hayes," Lisa said softly, "may I come in?" The old woman hesitated, gaze flicking past the detective to the empty street. For 30 years, no one had knocked on her door except neighbors with pity, preachers with prayers, and reporters with cameras. But this felt different. She stepped aside. The living room smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Family photographs lined the mantel, though most frames were old, colors fading. Daniel's uniformed portrait stood in the center, his face young, strong, still frozen in the year he disappeared. Claire's eyes lingered on it as she lowered herself back into the chair. Lisa sat across from her, notebook in hand, but she didn't flip it open right away. Instead, she studied Claire, the way grief had carved her shoulders into a permanent hunch, the way her voice trembled even in silence. "I know this must feel like opening an old wound," Lisa began, "but I need to ask you about Daniel, about the days before he disappeared." Claire's lips pressed together. For a moment, Lisa thought she might refuse. Then the old woman exhaled, a sound heavy with years of restraint. "He wasn't himself," Claire said finally. Her voice cracked, then steadied. "The week before he vanished, he hardly slept. He would sit out on the porch at night, staring into the trees. I'd ask him what was wrong, and he'd just shake his head." Lisa leaned forward. "Did he say anything at all?" Claire's fingers gripped the blanket. "One night he told me something that's haunted me ever since. He said, 'If something happens to me, don't believe what they'll say.'" The room went still. Rain tapped against the windows like fingernails. Lisa's pen hovered, but she didn't write right away. She let the words sink in. "What did you think he meant?" Claire shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. "At the time, I thought maybe it was stress. He'd been arguing with Frank, his partner. Daniel said he was digging into things at the station, things he wasn't supposed to touch. I begged him to stop. I told him no truth was worth his life." Lisa's pulse quickened. "What kind of things?" Claire looked away, her gaze fixed on Daniel's photograph. "He never said, but he carried papers, files he kept in the trunk of his car. He was afraid, though he tried not to show it. He thought someone was watching him." Her voice dropped, barely audible, and then he was gone. Lisa finally wrote, her pen scratching across the page. This was no ordinary cold case. Files in the trunk. A trooper investigating his own brothers in uniform. A warning left for the only person he trusted. "Mrs. Hayes," Lisa said carefully. Did you ever see those papers again? Claire's shoulders stiffened. No, and I looked. After he disappeared, they cleared out the car, his locker, everything. Those papers vanished with him. The detective closed her notebook, a knot forming in her stomach. Someone had made sure those documents never saw daylight. Claire's voice broke through her thoughts, brittle but fierce. They said he ran off, that he left me. Do you know what it's like to hear that for 30 years? To live in the same town where people look at you like you were the reason? Tears finally spilled down her cheeks and Lisa let her cry, the sound raw, guttural, like the storm that had swallowed Daniel all those years ago. When the sobs subsided, Claire wiped her eyes. Her voice was a whisper. Daniel wasn't perfect, but he didn't leave me. Someone took him. Lisa rose, her notebook heavy in her hand. She placed a card on the coffee table. I believe you, and I'll find out who. As she stepped back into the rain, she knew the path forward was clear. If Daniel had been investigating corruption, the first person who could confirm it was the man who had stood beside him every night, his old partner, Frank. And some part of Lisa already feared what he might confess. The bar smelled of stale beer and old wood, the kind of place where time dragged its feet. Detective Lisa Monroe pushed through the heavy door, her badge tucked out of sight. She scanned the dim room until she saw him, Frank Dalton. Once Frank had been Daniel Hayes's partner. Now, 30 years later, he was a heavy-set man with a thinning crown of gray hair, shoulders slumped as though gravity had claimed its victory. He sat in the corner booth nursing a glass of whiskey, eyes fixed on nothing. Lisa slid into the booth across from him. Mr. Dalton? He looked up, blinking, the faintest smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Haven't been called that in years. Everyone just says Frank, or nothing at all. She studied him, measuring his words, his expression. You know why I'm here. Course I do. He lifted the glass, swallowed. They found the car. Took him long enough. His nonchalance was almost too smooth. Lisa leaned in. Claire says Daniel was investigating something. Corruption. You were his partner. You knew what he was digging into. Frank's jaw tightened. He set the glass down hard enough to rattle the ice. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he leaned back, shoulders sagging. He was right, Frank said finally. His voice was low, hoarse. There were men, cops, sheriffs, skimming money, running favors for landowners, burying evidence. Daniel started asking questions he wasn't supposed to. Lisa's pen hovered. And? Frank rubbed his face with a shaking hand. And I told him to stop. I begged him. You don't take on men like that. Not in this town. But Daniel, he let out a bitter laugh. Daniel always thought the truth was enough. Lisa's chest tightened. This was the thread she'd been waiting for. But something in Frank's tone told her there was more. Something festering behind his eyes. What aren't you telling me? She pressed. Frank's gaze flicked away toward the bottles lined on the shelf. His voice dropped. Claire, Lisa stilled. What about her? She wasn't just Daniel's wife. His words came out jagged like glass. She was mine too. Not officially. Not out in the open. But we loved each other. For years. The confession hit the table like a gunshot. Lisa felt the room tilt, the pieces shifting in her mind. Claire, the grieving widow, the loyal wife, had been entangled with her husband's partner. Frank's eyes shone with something like shame. Daniel never knew. At least I don't think he did. But maybe he suspected. He was distant those last weeks, colder with her. I used to tell myself it was just the stress. But maybe it was more. Lisa's pen scratched furiously across the page. The lines of betrayal were no longer rumors, they were fact. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Frank's hands trembled as he reached for the glass again. Because I've carried it too long. And because, if Daniel's death had anything to do with me, I need to know. Lisa narrowed her eyes. Did it? Frank met her gaze unflinching. I didn't kill him. But I didn't protect him either. When the wrong men started circling, I walked away. I chose Claire. I left Daniel to fight alone. The words sat between them, heavy as stone. Lisa closed her notebook slowly, her mind racing. Daniel had been betrayed twice by his brothers in uniform and by the woman he trusted most. It wasn't enough to explain his disappearance, but it made the silence of 30 years feel sharper, crueler. She rose from the booth, leaving Frank staring into his empty glass. His confession was only the beginning, and Lisa knew exactly where it pointed next. If Daniel had been unfaithful, if there had been another woman, she had to be found. And maybe she held the final piece of Daniel Hayes's last days. Detective Lisa Monroe sat in her car, the engine idling low, staring at the faded house at the edge of town. The place looked abandoned, its paint peeling, windows shuttered. But she knew someone lived there. Someone who had been waiting 3 decades for a knock that never came. Maria Lopez, Daniel Hayes's secret. Lisa drew in a breath and stepped out, boots crunching against gravel. She knocked once, twice. The door creaked open. Maria stood there, her hair streaked with silver, her frame wiry and tense. Her eyes, however, were alive, dark, sharp, suspicious. Yes, I'm Detective Monroe. I'm investigating the disappearance of Daniel Hayes. The name alone was enough. Maria's face flickered, pain, then anger, then a sort of resignation. She pushed the door wider. You'd better come in. Inside, the house was modest but neat, filled with the faint scent of lavender. Family photos lined the shelves, but one frame sat turned face down on a side table. Lisa's gaze lingered on it, Maria noticed. You don't need to see that, she said softly. Lisa met her eyes. Was it him? Maria hesitated, then sighed. Yes, Daniel. 30 years and I still can't bear to look at it. They sat at a small kitchen table, sunlight filtering weakly through lace curtains. Maria's hands trembled as she poured coffee, but her voice when she spoke was steady. Daniel came to me because I listened, because I saw him. He wasn't just the uniform, the husband, the trooper everyone expected him to be. He was tired, worn down by the job, by Claire. Lisa leaned forward. By Claire? Maria nodded slowly. She was distant. He told me she never trusted him anymore. He thought she was seeing someone else. Lisa's chest tightened. Frank's confession echoed in her mind. Claire wasn't just Daniel's wife. She was mine too. Maria looked down at her coffee, swirling it absently. He used to come here late after his shifts. We never spoke about the future. It was always about the present, about escaping. But the week he disappeared, something changed. Lisa's pen hovered. What happened? Maria's eyes hardened. He told me he found something. Something he couldn't ignore. Records, names, payoffs, all tied to officers he worked with. He said if anything happened to him, I'd know why. Lisa felt her pulse quicken. This was it, the missing link between Daniel's investigation and his vanishing. Did he leave you anything? She asked. Maria stood and crossed the room. From a drawer, she pulled out a faded envelope. The paper yellowed with age. She slid it across the table. Inside were scribbled notes, fragments of names, dates, and locations. One word appeared again and again, Millstone Quarry. Lisa frowned. What's Millstone Quarry? Maria's voice dropped. It's where he said they'd bury the truth if they had to. He laughed when he said it, but there was no humor in his eyes. It was like he knew. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with unspoken fears. Lisa carefully folded the papers back into the envelope. Maria, she said gently, why didn't you come forward before? Tears welled in the woman's eyes. Because I loved him. And because loving him was already a betrayal. If I told the truth, I would have destroyed everything. My family, his memory. And maybe I was afraid they'd come for me too. Her confession cracked the silence. Lisa felt the weight of 30 years of secrets pressing down. Claire's betrayal, Frank's guilt, and now Maria, the hidden chapter of Daniel's life, revealing that he had trusted her with his darkest discovery. Lisa rose from her chair, the envelope clutched tightly. Thank you, Maria. I think Daniel wanted this to be found. As she stepped back into the cool evening air, Lisa felt the pieces aligning. Millstone Quarry wasn't just a clue. It was a graveyard, perhaps the graveyard. Her next move was clear. She had to go there. The road to Millstone Quarry wound through miles of forgotten forest. Lisa's headlights cut through the dark, the beams catching fog that clung to the trees like ghosts. The place had been abandoned for years, left to rot after a mining accident in the late 80s. Locals spoke of it like a wound, cursed, best left untouched, but Daniel Hayes hadn't left it untouched. Lisa parked at the edge of the crumbling gravel lot, her engine ticking as it cooled. She pulled her flashlight from the glove box, stepped out and inhaled the bitter night air. The quarry loomed ahead, a vast pit swallowing the moonlight. Rusted machinery jutted from the ground like skeletons. Her boots crunched against the stones as she made her way down the incline. Each step seemed to echo, the silence unnatural, like even the crickets refused to come here. The deeper she went, the heavier the air became, damp, metallic, almost suffocating. At the bottom, her light swept across the ground, catching broken beams, shattered glass, and weeds clawing through the earth. Then she saw it, a concrete slab cracked down the middle, half buried in dirt. Spray painted across it, faded but still visible, was the number 81. Her pulse quickened. The year Daniel disappeared. Lisa crouched, running her fingers over the rough surface. Something about the way the earth bulged near the edges told her it wasn't just debris. She tapped the slab. Hollow. Her breath caught. She pulled out her phone, snapping photos, documenting every angle. But the slab was too heavy to move alone. She would need a team. Still, something gnawed at her. She couldn't just leave without knowing. Lisa scanned the site again, her light grazing over a half-collapsed shack near the quarry wall. She approached cautiously, the wooden door hanging from its hinges. Inside, dust swirled in the beam of her flashlight. Old helmets, rusted tools, scraps of rope. And then, tucked in the corner beneath a rotten tarp, something that didn't belong. A state trooper's hat. Her throat tightened as she lifted it, brushing away the dust. The badge number gleamed faintly under the light. Daniel Hayes. Lisa's knees weakened. She sat down hard on a broken crate, the hat trembling in her hands. This wasn't just a dump site. This was where he had been brought, where he had been silenced. She whispered, "What did they do to you, Daniel?" The sound of her own voice startled her. The air felt thick, pressing in as though the quarry itself was holding its secrets tight. She forced herself to stand, to keep looking. Behind the shack, half hidden under creeping vines, was a rusted door set into the rock wall. The handle resisted, screeching as she pulled. It opened to reveal a narrow passage, the air cold and damp. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to wait for backup. But the image of Daniel's hat in her hand pushed her forward. The tunnel smelled of earth and rust, water dripping somewhere in the darkness. Her flashlight beam swept across graffiti scrawled on the walls, beer bottles left by trespassers. But deeper in, the signs of human presence changed. Old wooden beams shored up the tunnel, and carved into one beam, faint but deliberate, was a single word: help. Lisa's breath hitched. She reached out, tracing the letters with her fingertips. Daniel's, or someone else's. The tunnel ended in a chamber, walls damp with mineral stains. In the center was a pile of earth, deliberately heaped. She crouched, brushing at it with her hands. Beneath the dirt she found fragments, metal, glass, and then, horrifyingly, bone. Her stomach lurched. She stumbled back, clutching her flashlight tight. Not a complete skeleton, not yet. Just pieces, scattered, buried, hidden, but enough to know the quarry was more than a dumping ground. It was a grave. Lisa's mind spun. Was this Daniel? Or others before him? The thought clawed at her chest. She forced herself to retreat, every step back through the tunnel echoing like footsteps chasing her. When she finally emerged into the night air, she gulped it down like she'd been drowning. Clutching Daniel's hat, she whispered a promise into the dark quarry. "I'll bring it all to light. I swear it." As she climbed back to her car, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like him." Her hands froze, the quarry looming behind her like a silent witness. The past wasn't just whispering anymore. It was watching. Lisa sat frozen in the driver's seat, her phone glowing in her hand. The words on the screen pulsed like a heartbeat. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like him." Her fingers hovered over the screen. The number was blocked. No reply option. Whoever sent it wanted control. One voice, one warning. She killed the engine's silence by starting the car, headlights slicing the dark. As she pulled out of the quarry lot, the weight of Daniel's hat on the passenger seat felt heavier than steel. Proof she had crossed an invisible line. Proof someone was watching. The drive back to town was tense, every headlight behind her a possible tail, every shadow in the tree line a set of eyes. She checked her mirrors again and again, but the road stayed empty. Still, the unease clung to her like damp clothes. When she finally reached her apartment, the city lights brought no comfort. She climbed the stairs quickly, key ready in her hand. But as she slid it into the lock, she froze. The door was already ajar. Her pulse spiked. Lisa drew her gun, nudged the door open with her foot, and swept the room with quick, precise motions. Inside, everything looked normal. Too normal. The lights were off, the windows closed, nothing broken. But her desk, the one where she kept her case files, was bare. Every note, every photo gone. Her eyes narrowed. They hadn't taken her laptop, her money, or anything of value. Just the case. She lowered her weapon, chest tightening. They were in here. They know everything. The phone buzzed again. Another message. This is your only warning. Walk away. Lisa's jaw clenched. Fear prickled her skin, but beneath it, anger burned hotter. She had seen enough cases crumble under threats and intimidation. She wasn't going to let Daniel Hayes be another name lost in the dark. Still, she wasn't reckless. She needed allies. She grabbed her keys and headed for the one man who might still know how deep this rot went. Frank Dalton. He opened the door after her third knock. His eyes bloodshot, whiskey heavy on his breath. "Detective," he muttered. "I was hoping I'd seen the last of you." Lisa pushed past him into the cluttered living room. "Someone broke into my place. Took my notes. Left me a message." She tossed her phone onto the table. Frank read the screen, his expression souring. "They're watching you now. You should have stopped when I told you." Lisa leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Who's they, Frank? Who's been keeping this buried for 30 years? Frank's hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. He drew in smoke like it might steel his nerves. Sheriff Landry. Back then, he was untouchable. He and a few deputies ran everything. Money, land deals, protection rackets. Daniel found out. He was gonna take it up the chain. But Landry, he had friends higher than you'd believe. Lisa's stomach turned. "And you knew?" "I knew enough." His voice cracked. "Daniel trusted me. Told me things he never should have. And when I didn't back him, he went alone. That's what got him killed." Lisa slammed her palm against the table. "Killed Frank?" "You know he was killed?" Frank flinched but didn't answer. His silence was louder than any confession. Before Lisa could press further, a sharp crack split the night. The window behind her shattered. Gunfire. Down. Lisa shoved Frank to the floor as shards rained across the room. Another shot tore through the wall, splintering the wood. They crawled behind the couch, Lisa's gun in hand, breath ragged. Outside, an engine roared to life, tires screeching against pavement. By the time she peered through the broken glass, the car was already gone, taillights vanishing into the dark. Frank's face was ashen, sweat beading on his forehead. "You don't get it," he rasped. "They're not warning you anymore. They're hunting you." Lisa holstered her weapon, her pulse still racing. The threat wasn't a shadow anymore. It had teeth. She picked up Daniel's hat from her bag, clutching it tight. "Then let them come," she whispered. "Because I'm not stopping." The quarry had given her bones. The gunfire had given her proof. And now the case was no longer just Daniel's. It was hers. The next morning, Lisa stood outside the county records office, her reflection staring back from the glass doors. Her eyes were bloodshot, her nerves still raw from the gunfire that had shattered Frank's living room. But exhaustion had sharpened her resolve. If Sheriff Landry's name was at the heart of this, she had to drag it into daylight. Inside, the clerk barely looked up as Lisa flashed her badge. "I need all archived personnel and financial records connected to Sheriff William Landry, from 1975 to 1990. The clerk frowned. "That's a lot of paper. Most of it's boxed in storage. I'll wait." 3 hours later, Lisa sat surrounded by towers of manila folders, the smell of dust and mildew thick in the air. She combed through financial ledgers, campaign donations, and sheriff's logs. At first glance, nothing screamed corruption, just tidy numbers and clean reports. Too clean. It wasn't until she cross-checked Landry's property purchases against county land deeds that cracks appeared. Dozens of acquisitions under shell names bought at suspiciously low prices. Land was seized after investigations into owners who mysteriously vanished or folded under pressure. Lisa's pulse quickened. Landry hadn't just been the law. He had been the market, the judge, and the executioner. She flipped to Daniel's old patrol log, scanning for connections. One entry made her hand freeze. October 14th, 1981. Patrol near Millstone Quarry. Unusual truck activity. We'll report further. The log ended abruptly. No follow-up. Lisa whispered. That was the night. The thought struck her like ice. Daniel hadn't been caught by accident. He'd stumbled into something happening at the quarry, something Landry had been protecting. She snapped photos of every incriminating page, and tucked the files back neatly. If someone had already broken into her home, she couldn't afford to leave a trail. That evening, Lisa drove out to the old Landry estate on the edge of town. The mansion loomed behind wrought iron gates, its windows dark, the paint peeling in strips. Landry himself had died in 2003, but the property was still in his family's name. She parked a block away and approached on foot, crunching along the gravel shoulder. The gate was chained, but the side fence had collapsed in places. Lisa slipped through, her flashlight off, relying on the moon. Up close, the house was worse, shutters hanging, ivy choking the walls. Yet the porch light glowed faintly, buzzing against moths. Someone was still here. Lisa pressed herself against the siding, peering through a cracked window. Inside, a man hunched over a table piled with papers. His face was gaunt, his hair thin and white, but the badge on the wall behind him told her everything. Deputy Roy Atkins. Landry's right hand. Lisa's chest tightened. Atkins had retired decades ago, but if anyone had carried Landry's secrets forward, it was him. She raised her phone, snapping a quick photo. But the click was louder than she expected in the night silence. Inside, Atkins stiffened, head jerking toward the window. Lisa ducked, heart hammering. She pressed herself low against the porch, breath caught in her throat. A moment later, the door creaked open. "Who's out there?" Atkins's voice was gravelly, sharp. Lisa held her breath. The beam of a flashlight cut across the yard, sweeping dangerously close. Then, after a tense pause, the door slammed shut again. Lisa exhaled shakily, retreating toward the broken fence. She couldn't risk confrontation yet, not without leverage. As she slipped back into the shadows, her phone buzzed. A voicemail from Frank, his voice trembling. "They know you were at the records office. They know about the quarry. Lisa, don't come here again. I'm not safe." The line cut out with a burst of static. Lisa clenched her jaw. The circle was tightening. Landry's men, or their sons, their loyal inheritors, still watched, still silenced, still threatened. The sheriff's grip had outlived him. Back at her car, she opened the envelope Maria had given her. Daniel's note stared back at her, the word Millstone Quarry underlined twice. But beneath it was something she hadn't noticed before, a name scribbled in rushed, almost panicked handwriting. Atkins. Lisa's blood ran cold. Daniel had known. He'd written it down. And now she had seen Atkins alive, guarding the Landry estate like a sentinel. The sheriff's legacy wasn't just old ghosts. It was flesh and blood, still breathing, still dangerous. Lisa tightened her grip on the envelope. She had one choice left. Confront Atkins before he silenced someone else. The next night, rain lashed the streets in sheets, turning the town into a smear of reflections. Lisa pulled her hood low, parking 2 blocks from the Landry estate. The house glowed faintly against the storm, one lonely lamp still burning inside. Deputy Roy Atkins was there, watching, waiting. She tucked Daniel's notes into her jacket pocket, the name Atkins underlined like a ghost whispering in her ear. She couldn't wait any longer. If she gave him time, he might vanish, or worse, strike first. Her boots sank into mud as she cut through the fence again, rain dripping cold into her collar. She circled the back porch, gun drawn, and knocked once, firm. The light inside shifted. A pause. Then the door opened. Atkins filled the frame, older but still broad, his eyes pale and sharp under heavy brows. He didn't flinch at the sight of her weapon. "You should have stayed away, detective," he said. His voice was gravel and smoke, steady despite the storm outside. Lisa stepped inside, dripping water onto the warped floorboards. "You've been keeping this secret for 30 years. I'm done chasing shadows. Tell me what happened to Daniel Hayes." Atkins shut the door with a deliberate click. He moved past her, settling into a chair at the table piled with yellowed files. His hands shook faintly as he lit a cigarette. "You think you're the first to come asking," he said, exhaling smoke. "You're not. But you might be the last." Lisa didn't lower her weapon. "Then tell me why his car was buried under concrete. Tell me why his hat was left to rot in the quarry. And tell me why his name is written in his own hand beside yours." For the first time, Atkins's composure faltered. He pinched the bridge of his nose, the weight of memory bowing his shoulders. "Daniel," he swallowed hard. "He was a good man, too good. He believed the badge still meant something. But Landry, he'd turned the badge into a weapon. Money, land, favors. We all looked away. I looked away. Except Daniel." Lisa's voice cut through. "So you silenced him?" Atkins slammed his fist against the table, the cigarette trembling in his other hand. "No, I never touched him." That night he radioed in from the quarry, said he'd seen trucks unloading crates, evidence of payoffs. "Landry sent me out there to help." Lisa's breath quickened. "But you didn't help." Atkins shook his head slowly, eyes glassy. "By the time I got there, Daniel was already on his knees. Landry and 2 of his men had him cornered. He was holding his notes, shouting about corruption, about taking it all to the state. And Landry?" He just laughed. The image burned in Lisa's mind. Daniel, rain soaking his uniform, defiant even as the barrel of a gun pressed against his skull. Atkins's voice cracked. "I should have stepped in. I should have done something." But Landry looked at me and I froze. He said, "You with him or with me?" And I stayed silent. The storm outside roared, thunder rattling the windows. Lisa's hands trembled, though she kept her gun steady. What happened next? Atkins crushed the cigarette in the ashtray, his fingers digging into the wood of the table. "They shot him, buried the car under concrete in the quarry to make it disappear, and they told me if I ever spoke, I'd join him. I carried that silence for 30 years, Detective. 30 goddamn years." The words hung heavy, thick as smoke. Lisa's chest tightened. The betrayal was deeper than she had imagined. Not just from Frank, not just from Claire, but from the entire system Daniel had sworn to serve. Atkins looked up, his eyes wet. "You think you want the truth? But the truth is poison. Landry's men may be gone, but their sons, their nephews, they're still here. They're the ones who sent that message. They'll kill you like they killed him." Lisa lowered her weapon at last, her voice quiet but resolute. "If they're still out there, then this isn't over. Daniel doesn't get to stay buried." Atkins gave a hollow laugh. "You think you can dig him up and not drown with him?" Lisa leaned closer, her eyes fierce. "I don't care if I drown, but his story's coming out, and you're going to help me." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain hammering the roof. Then Atkins nodded, defeated. "I'll show you where they put him," he whispered. "But once you see it, there's no going back." Lisa straightened, holstering her gun. Her pulse pounded with grim determination. No going back is the only way forward. The storm had not relented by the time Lisa and Atkins reached the quarry. The night pressed in heavy, the rain a curtain of silver that blurred the world. Flashlight beams carved weak tunnels through the darkness as they descended the muddy slope. The quarry looked like a scar cut into the earth, jagged rock walls glistening with rain, pools of black water collecting in the pits. The smell of wet stone and iron filled the air. Atkins trudged beside her, his shoulders hunched, his breath wheezing. "It's here," he muttered, pointing with a trembling hand. Right beneath the old concrete slab. Lisa's light landed on a massive slab half buried in earth, its surface cracked, moss crawling over the edges. Rainwater ran down its grooves like veins. She crouched, running her fingers across the stone, cold, unyielding. Beneath it, Daniel Hayes. The weight of 30 years pressed down with the storm. "We'll need equipment," Lisa said, turning to Atkins. "Excavators, forensics, a crew." Atkins shook his head violently. "No, you don't understand. If you bring anyone, word will spread. Landry's people will know. They'll shut this down before it even starts." Lightning flared, illuminating his worn face. He wasn't lying. Lisa swallowed hard. "Then we move it tonight." Together, they pried at the slab with rusted tools Atkins had hidden years ago. Remnants of a conscience buried but not dead. Their muscles strained, backs aching, rain stinging their eyes. The slab shifted with a groan, stone grinding against stone. Lisa's hands slipped in the mud, but she pressed harder, teeth clenched. With a final heave, the slab tilted just enough to reveal the dark soil beneath. The ground exhaled a smell of rot and oil. Her flashlight trembled as she dug with her hands, mud caking her nails. Then fabric, a torn sleeve, the faded blue of a highway patrolman's uniform. Lisa froze. Her throat closed. "Daniel!" Atkins knelt beside her, his breath ragged. "God forgive me." Bone gleamed pale under the light. Ribs collapsed inward, a skull half-crushed from the weight above. And there, still clutched in skeletal fingers, was a leather-bound notebook, warped but intact. Lisa lifted it with trembling hands. The initials burned into the cover. DH inside, the ink had blurred, but some pages survived. Lists of names, dates, transactions, enough to crack open the corruption Daniel had died trying to expose. She wiped her face, though rain and tears mixed indistinguishably. "This is it." His voice, His evidence, Atkins stared down at the bones. I see him every night, kneeling here. I never lifted a hand to save him. Before Lisa could answer, movement flickered at the edge of the quarry. Shadows. She spun, flashlight slicing across the rain. Figures emerged from the darkness, boots crunching gravel. 3 men, armed, their faces hidden by hoods. Atkins stiffened. Landry's kin, he whispered. The lead figure raised a rifle. His voice carried cold and sure through the storm. Step away from the grave. That man's been dead for 30 years. He stays dead. Lisa pulled her gun, heart thundering. He doesn't stay dead. Not this time. The standoff crackled with tension, thunder rolling overhead like a war drum. The men spread out, weapons steady. Atkins stepped forward suddenly, hands raised. Don't shoot her. This is on me. Roy, Lisa hissed, but he didn't stop. The leader sneered. You kept quiet, old man. Should have stayed that way. Lisa's finger tightened on the trigger, but Atkins moved faster than she expected. With a guttural roar, he lunged at the nearest gunman, knocking the rifle aside. The shot exploded into the night, echoing through the quarry. Chaos erupted. Lisa dropped low, firing once, her bullet catching a second man in the leg. He fell screaming into the mud. The leader swung his rifle toward her, but she rolled behind a slab, rain spraying into her eyes. Atkins wrestled the first man, fists slamming, both men slipping in the mud. Then another shot. Atkins staggered, clutching his side. Blood poured between his fingers. Roy, Lisa shouted, firing again. The leader stumbled back, hit in the shoulder but didn't fall. His fury twisted through the storm as he raised his weapon for the killing blow. Lisa steadied her breath. One shot left. She leaned out from cover, the world narrowing to her sight. The storm silenced by the pounding of her heart. She fired. The leader jerked, the rifle clattering from his hands as he collapsed into the mud. Silence. Only rain and thunder remained. Lisa rushed to Atkins, dropping beside him. His breath rattled, shallow. Blood stained his lips. You saw him free, he whispered, eyes glassy. Tell him. I'm sorry. Lisa gripped his hand, tears streaking her face. You fought for him tonight. That's what matters. His hand went limp in hers. The storm rolled on. Lisa stood, soaked and shaking, notebook clutched against her chest. Around her lay bones, evidence, blood, and truth finally unearthed. Daniel Hayes would not vanish again. As dawn broke hours later, the quarry was swarming with state investigators. Lisa stood at the edge, watching as Daniel's remains were lifted carefully, draped in tarps. She handed over the notebook, her jaw set. Reporters would come. Questions would be asked. The town's rotten core would finally face daylight. But for now, in the gray light of morning, Lisa closed her eyes and whispered into the wind. You're not forgotten, Daniel. Not anymore. And for the first time in decades, the silence broke.